Hi, my name's Dr. Merck Index, and what I want to talk to you about is something called CoSHH. No, it's not something that you hit somebody with, it's actually a system that's been put in place in any institution where you might come across a substance, and it's not necessarily a chemical, that might cause you harm when you're actually using it. The whole idea is safety. Am I going to be safe using this particular substance? If not, what are the risks? And what you have to do, specifically for your project work, for this is what it's aimed at mostly, is for you to fill in what are called CoSHH forms or CoSHH assessments. You need one of these for every chemical you use. What I aim to do is to run you through how we do the CoSHH form, how you obtain the information, and one or two other points that might be of interest. To go with this, if you look in the same folder as you found this video, there's actually a written form of this, and you can put the two together. I strongly advise you to read the form very, very carefully, take a copy if you wish, and get to know what it says, because it will help you a great deal when you're doing your CoSHH assessments. All I'm simply going to do on this video is to run through the CoSHH form itself and the salient points so that you're in no doubt as to what to do. So what is CoSHH? Well, to be honest, you know what CoSHH is already. If at home, for example, you need to get out a bottle of bleach, such as this, you're all very familiar with it, you actually make a CoSHH assessment as soon as you decide to use it. You know it's bleach, you know what it'll do, and you know not what to do with it. You know what to do with it if you spill it on yourself, you know what to do if you actually drop it on the floor, and you know what harm you can come to if you actually spill it on yourself. You're familiar with this, which is the label on the side, and this is actually CoSHH information. It has a hazard symbol. It will tell you some information here about what to do and what not to do with it. But you know this because you've used bleach before. You apply it to everything, washing up liquid, sugar, whatever. That's a CoSHH assessment you make in your head. Now, you have to apply that system to chemicals you see in the lab that you're going to use in your project. You may have one chemical to use in your project, you may have 101. It doesn't matter. Each one of those chemicals needs a CoSHH assessment. And what you're effectively doing is making out what's called a risk assessment for use of that chemical. But it may not be a chemical, it may be some other substance. It might be some dust you've got to analyse, it might be a microbe that you've got to actually plate out, it might be some substance that's been collected from a canal. Any substance which you are unaware of in its properties, you must make an assessment for how you use it. This is the CoSHH form we use. Now you can blame me if you don't like it because I wrote it, but it's been used for some years, it's been used quite successfully, and what I'm going to do is run through the various boxes so that you're in no doubt as to what to put in. Now, as you can see, it covers 4 sides. Don't worry about that. That doesn't mean there's a great problem in having to fill out 4 sides for every chemical, because once you're into the actual stream of running through this, getting the information and filling it in, it becomes quite simple. And a lot of it relies on common sense. I'm going to stress that point now. When you actually obtain the information to fill out your CoSHH form, you'll be confronted with explanations like, if you drop it, call the local fire brigade, evacuate the building, explosive fire hazard, this sort of business. But does that apply to what you're doing? If you have a 500 gram bottle of sodium chloride, it's salt. If you drop it on the floor, you are told to sweep it up and discard to waste. It's not really a danger. If you have a warehouse full of a substance or a chemical, and that is in a danger of being on fire or in mixing with another chemical it shouldn't do, then yes, you may well have to evacuate the building and call for emergency services because you can't handle it. We would like you to apply common sense when filling out a CoSHH form. If I have a small spillage, I don't need to evacuate the building, I need to get some help, and I need to obey what the CoSHH assessment said. It's as simple as that. If in doubt, ask. But you will never be in a position where you have a huge quantity of a particular substance which you have to deal with and would necessitate the evacuation of the building. So, how do I obtain the information? Well, the easiest way to do it is to Google it. You might think, oh, is that all I do? Yes, that is all you do. What we're going to show you are some still shots of various pages of Google, and that will annotate what I'm about to say. If you have to look up a particular chemical, the easiest thing to do is to type in exactly into Google the chemical you want. So for example, I want to look up sulfuric acid. I'll choose sulfuric acid because it's a fairly nasty chemical and there's a lot of data available for it. If I type in conc, concentrated sulfuric acid, I then have to follow that with the letters MSDS, which stands for Material Safety Data Sheet. Now, The information you will find on these MSDS data sheets is internationally known and accepted. It's been worked out over many years. People know what the chemical is, what it's capable of doing, and the safety data sheet has been produced to go with that chemical. Now, the page that you can see in front of you shows you a list of sites that specify MSDS for concentrated sulfuric acid. There are also some other listings in there. For example, there's Wikipedia. That's fine, it'll tell you all about concentrated sulfuric acid. You can read it to your heart's content. It might tell you something useful for your CoSHH form. However, what you really want is the MSDS data. Some sites are better than others. If you notice on the left of the actual listing, it's got PDF. I'd go for those first because that tends to be the actual information, the data sheets themselves, and nothing else. And that's exactly what you want. If you look at one of the other listings, you'll find it's by somebody called Sigma Aldrich. Now, Sigma Aldrich are a chemical supplying company. There are many of them, and they will have their own website, and in that website will be data sheets referring to different chemicals. Unfortunately, you won't necessarily get to that data with the first click. You'll probably enter a site that says sulfuric acid, and there are lots of different types. What it will expect you to do is to select the one you want to buy. Then as almost like a sidebar, if you want to know about the data sheets, it will say on the right data or MSDS, and you can click on that. So there's a number of clicks involved, and sometimes you get lost in a circle in a site trying to find the data. So just avoid those. Go for the PDFs if you can, and there are some examples here and you can see them. And in the information that comes with this, on this video site, you'll find all this in some detail, so it will help you run through it. But here's just an example of a page off Google for concentrated sulfuric acid. You can see the number of choices you get. It's the same for all chemicals. You'll get into the swing of this. If you're doing a large number of chemicals, you'll find you quite quickly pick out the sites that are best. Some sites are done by universities because that's how they like to operate. Whatever works, whatever you can find that within 1 or 2 clicks you've got the information, go for that. Don't waste time swanning around looking at prices of sulfuric acid in different forms. Go straight for the data. That's all you need. What you can then do is look through the data sheet, obtain the information you need, and from that you can then fill out your CoSHH assessment. It's fairly simple. It's even been arranged so that if you look on the CoSHH form, many of the boxes are numbered, and the numbers actually correspond to the numbers on the data sheets that you will read. So for example, if I look on the back, box number 4 is first aid measures. On the data sheets you'll find box number 4 will cover all the first aid measures that need to be included on your CoSHH assessment. It's as simple as that. What we need you to do though is to use common sense again. So you're using small quantities of chemical, therefore you use what I would call small quantity sense and follow those guidelines. But whatever you write down on the CoSHH form, you must follow. So if you skip certain things and you don't write certain attributes down, you may forget how to deal with that chemical if you spill it. So never leave out important information. A question you might be asking yourself is, can I cut and paste the information from the data sheets into my CoSHH form? And the answer is no. This is a handwritten form, and you'll be asking yourself why? On a system of online data and cut and pasting, why can't I just do that? We found in the past, when we have run a cut and paste system from online data sheets, that students tend to cut and paste huge chunks of information from the data sheet straight into their CoSHH form. This has 2 problems. Firstly, you'll cut and paste a lot of information that isn't relevant because you're using small quantities. Secondly, you don't actually read it. What you'll do is get first aid measures, cut and paste, stick it in. You don't actually know what to do if you spill it on yourself. We work on the basis that if you actually have to sift through the information yourself and then write it down in your own hand, you will then actually maybe remember some of it. So if it says, never add this substance to water, that might actually stick in your head. So when you come to use the chemical, you'll go, oh, I must remember that. Whereas if you cut and pasted it, you may not have even noticed you cut and pasted those words. So it's a safety thing. We found it works very well. Yes, I know it means you've got to fill out each form by hand, but it won't take very long, and it can actually save you from some harm. The second thing is that because this CoSHH form does not actually refer to chemicals necessarily, you may have to find the data from somewhere else that's not on a material safety data sheet. Sometimes you might have to ask somebody like a technician who's got experience of this, or your supervisor who knows all about it. This especially applies to things that are maybe dug up from the open environment. There won't be a safety data sheet for that. There'll be maybe a protocol for handling it, but the actual substance itself, you then have to make an on-the-spot assessment. And if you're not sure, check with your supervisor before you fill in the form. Because whatever you put on the form then becomes the rule. This is how you have to use it. If something happens and you don't know what to do with the chemical, you can look up your CoSHH form. But if you haven't got it with you, you left it at home, that's no use to anybody because you won't know what to do with it. So always have them with you. On top of that, it is a requirement by law, and it is possible that the health and safety people who work in the university can actually visit a lab where students are busy, and they might randomly pick on a student and say, can I see your CoSHH forms please? Now if you haven't got your CoSHH forms with you, or they've been incorrectly filled out, or there's some other problem, we can get into trouble. So have them with you and have them correctly filled out. We will actually check that the CoSHH forms are correctly filled out before you're allowed to use the chemicals or substances anyway. So that shouldn't be a problem, but have them with you for your own safety. That's the whole point. The first page, you'll actually notice, is to do with what you're going to do with the chemical or substance itself. Now this is important to us. If you suddenly come to us and want a particular thing, we might go, why do you want that? Or why do you want that quantity? Surely you can do it with less. So the first part of the CoSHH form simply says, what is it you're going to use? That will give us an idea of what you're going to get up to. But then it asks you for the purpose you need the substance. Something simple. We don't want you to write out your whole project, what you're going to do with it. Just acid digestion, simple dilution for spreading on a plate, something like that. It'll give us some idea of what you're going to do with it, because sometimes we can spot maybe a problem by what you just simply put in that box, and we can suggest an alternative method. How much do you actually want? It's no good just saying I want some conch sulfuric acid. How much do you want? 5 mils, 50 mils, 5 litres? If you want 5 litres of conch sulfuric acid, I would actually question it, because that's an awful lot of acid. 5 mils, 50 mils, that's fine. But then how much are you going to make? 5 mils made up to 500, that's fine. 500 mils made up to 50 litres, whoa, I might actually question that as well. Firstly, what do you want that amount for, and where are you going to store it, and in what in? These are questions we have to take into account. Logistics is a part of doing CoSHH simply because we don't have the space to store huge quantities of things. And what are you actually going to be doing? Remember that many of the projects that we have to contend with students have been done before in some form. Maybe not exactly the way you're going to do it, but we have an idea because it's been done before. If somebody comes up with something new, that might cause problems of storage or concentration or vapors or something we haven't come across. So therefore they're open to discussion. The right at the bottom is an important bit. It says, I confirm that a safer alternative cannot be used. Now the reason we put that there is because in the past we've had the odd project where a student has required something that we go, well no, you're not allowed to use that. That's actually too poisonous. You can see behind me there's a cabinet full of dangerous chemicals. Normally you're not allowed to use them because of health and safety regulations. Sometimes it might be something like super glue. We've had projects in the past using that sort of equipment or chemical, and we would question their use. There are alternatives usually for something that we consider harmful. Tick that box and we'll make sure that that is the case. If there is something that we consider that is less harmful, if there is a harm attached to it, then we will suggest it. And at the bottom it says now refer to the appropriate safety data sheets. So now, having Googled your substance or your chemical, you can then begin to fill in the sheets. Now I'm going to quickly run through these boxes, and you will find that in this particular video there are still shots of the sort of thing we would expect you to fill into the box, something simple. If you want to put something more complicated and really write out some detail because it applies to your project that you think we ought to know or you want to remember, that's fine. You can do that. But simply avoid writing the huge lists of things that you'll find on the CoSHH data form sheets that don't apply to you. Just use common sense. The first example, it says number 2, what is it? And you'll find on the data sheets it will tell you that this is an inorganic acid or it's a salt or something like that. Make sure you know what it is. If it tells you that it's an oxidizing agent, for example, make sure you know what an oxidizing agent is, because it might be important. The opposite is a reducing agent. What's that? The third box says identified hazards. For example, it causes burns. Is it flammable? Is it toxic? This is information that's useful to you. What does it do? What am I going to be doing with it that relates to that? Do I want it to burn? If I don't, how do I stop it? First aid measures, box 4. What do I do if I get it on me? What do I do if I spill it? What do I do if I spill it on someone else? Now, you have been given a preparatory talk by another technician. before you start your project about the health and safety regulations that apply to working in the project lab. But make sure you know, for example, where the wash bottles are. Make sure your lab coat's done up. Make sure you're wearing some sort of eyewear protection at the very minimum. I always wear gloves if I'm handling chemicals because I don't want it on my skin. Your CoSHH data sheets will actually tell you specific bits of equipment you must use, and we'll come on to that later. But if you want to put it on here, do so. Firefighting measures. Is it flammable? Is it flammable in small quantities? Is it flammable if it's in larger quantities? Is it something that's going to self-ignite? Make sure you know what your chemical or substance is capable of doing. Firefighting measures will also tell you about what to do if there is a fire. Now this can cause a problem because in every lab you go into, every room you go into, you'll find there's a fire extinguisher. The accepted protocol is that you don't tackle the fire. If there is a fire, you scream help and somebody will do something about it. It's unlikely you will cause a big fire. What usually happens is someone spills some alcohol when they're swabbing something and there's a small alcohol fire, and we can deal with that quite easily. But what you're not meant to do is go and grab the fire extinguisher from the wall and start pumping foam over everything. That's not for you to do. If you have a small fire, tell people that there is a fire actually going on, and then something will happen. You don't have to bang the fire alarm, you don't have to evacuate the building, but use common sense. If you have a small fire in front of you, don't just stand there watching it burn, do something. Tell the technicians, tell the supervisor that's in charge of the lab, whatever, but don't just sit there. This will actually tell you what you should do, but you must paraphrase from the information. So if it says use a fire extinguishing towel or blanket, you can do that. But always get help. Don't try and do it on your own. If I spill it, what do I do? This is covered by box 6. Make sure you know what to do. If you spill a dry powder, something like salt, potassium chloride, something like that, it's a fairly simple thing. We can sweep it up, we can discard it. If it's a more hazardous chemical or substance, then again, we can collect it together and it will be disposed of. Your CoSHH information should tell you what to do, although you will normally find it says refer to local authority procedures. We will decide what to do, unless you have specific instructions from your supervisor, for example. If it's a big spillage of something horrible, like a solvent, then yes, then we'll do something about it. Solvents can spontaneously ignite. If it's gone everywhere, that could cause a problem. If you drop a huge bottle of acid on the floor, we'll have to deal with that in a particular way. But the most important thing is your safety. If you spilt it on you, you need to get the clothing upon which it's been spilt off. And there are ways and means of doing that. Don't be shy, it's going to cause some grief. If you're wearing a lab coat, hopefully that will have taken the brunt. The problem comes if you spilt it on the floor and it splashed onto your legs. Then we have to do something about that. In addition, you'll probably be working in a lab full of other people. What do they do? Well, you have to tell people what's happened. Everything has to stop to make sure that this is dealt with in the proper way. There is particular CoSHH information for any particular substance, but in general, make sure that you've told people what's happened, make sure you get some help, and that it can be dealt with quickly and efficiently. Do not panic. There is no need to panic. We have systems in place. We can deal with most things pretty quickly. Refer to your CoSHH forms if you're not sure. Box 7, handling and storage. Here you'll normally find there's some special instructions. For example, never add water to this material. Never mix this substance with this other substance. Never store with this substance. Keep away from the light. Always keep in the dark. Something like this. Put that sort of information in here. Sometimes a chemical or substance needs to be put in something other than glass. Sometimes it cannot be put in something that's plastic. You might find by putting it into a glass bottle with a plastic stopper, the stopper will stick because of it. This is the sort of information that you can find out from here and needs to go into this box. Make sure you know any special attributes of this substance or chemical that will affect you in use so that you can be prepared for it. It's important, for example, if we're using conchosulfuric acid, that you never actually add water to it. Because if you do, it will spontaneously explode. It boils upon contact. It generates an awful lot of heat. It's an exothermic reaction is the chemical term for it. So a small drop of water when it hits sulfuric acid will actually explode and you'll get a fine acid mist over everything. If you add a lot of water to a lot of acid, all sorts of nasty things can happen. In general, it's preferred, if you're going to make a dilute solution of acid, you'll get a beaker, put some water in it and get it spinning on a hot plate stirrer and add the acid to that, in which case it will instantly be diluted. But beware, for example, conchosulfuric acid, if you make quite a heavy concentration of that, it generates a lot of heat, so you won't be able to actually touch the beaker. So you'll need to use heat-proof gloves when handling the beaker, or you need to leave it to cool down. Okay, you're in a fume cupboard, you've got a hot plate stirrer with acid cooling down, and you go to lunch. Is that safe? No. If you're going to do that sort of thing, use a sign which says, concentrated sulfuric acid, hot, please leave. Some sort of warning. Experiment in progress signs are available in the lab. Use some sort of warning to tell other people so that if somebody spills it in your absence, they know what it is and they can get help. If it's a clear liquid, it could be anything. It could be a salt solution. If it's conc sulfuric acid, it's distinctly different. So again, use common sense. Imagine what would happen if it happened to you. If I spilt some clear liquid, what do? Do I taste it? No. Do I smell it? No. I don't know what to do with it. Leave some advice with people so they know what to do with it. It's in your own interest, really, to think about these sort of things. And it comes down to a sort of professional use of a lab. If you're in the big outside world and you're working in a professional lab, this would be expected of you. It's exactly the same in the project lab. Here you have an example of where for the first time I'm going to be working on my own in a semi-professional position. I'm responsible for my own work, getting on with it and dealing with the tools and equipment and chemicals, whatever substance, in my own place. Be responsible. Use common sense. It actually tells you here that all original chemicals, solvents and diluted chemicals containing solvents must be stored in the appropriate place. Solvents, for example, are very volatile. They need to go in a solvent bin that's flash proof. You can't just put a bottle of alcohol in the fridge because you get sparks in the fridge. It could ignite any fumes that are lingering there. Some chemicals have to go in a certain place. The data sheets will tell you. You will find, for example, if you go to collect a particular substance, say ethanol, you'll be issued with a bottle of ethanol from a solvent bin, and you'll think, oh, that comes from a special place. It has to go back there. You can't then store it in your cupboard. If you get a bottle of chemical off the shelf, you can put it back on the shelf, that's fine. If it comes from a locked cabinet that says dangerous chemicals, that's where it's got to go. In general, you're not really allowed to keep chemicals in your cupboards. Make sure you know this. Check with your supervisor and the technical staff who will be supporting you before you do that sort of thing. There's nothing worse than finding a cupboard full of chemicals that shouldn't be stored together. CoSHH data will tell you not to store certain chemicals. Don't do it. Box 8, personal protection. Now, we've already mentioned, and you will have been told before, that you must always, at the very minimum, wear a lab coat, hopefully that's done up. There's no point having one undone because you'll spill things down the front. Yes, you can wipe your hands on the back of it, that's fine, but the spillages will be at the front. It will protect you right down to your knees. Eyewear protection, matter of course, you have to wear eyewear protection. But sometimes the CoSHH data will tell you to wear something extra, a full face visor, for example, because of splashing onto the skin. It might tell you to wear an apron. You might want to wear an apron because you're not sure about what you're doing. A disposable apron can be found, and anything spilt on it you can then get rid of and we can discard. There are different types of gloves. If it says use heavy rubber gloves, that doesn't mean the disposable ones, that means things like marigolds and above, because it's going to produce more heat. It might actually eat the glove, you don't know. Heavy gloves for using things that are hot. These will all be specified. Can I use it on the open bench? Sometimes. Do I have to use a fume cupboard? Sometimes. Sometimes I have to use a safety cabinet. That's especially true if you're using microbes. Check with the technicians if you're not sure what these things are, but make sure you know what they are before you start work. There's no point sitting down with your CoSHH data and says, well, I've got to do this in a safety cabinet, but I don't know what that is or where they are. Find out. There is a box here that says other. Occasionally in the past we've had students doing something that requires maybe some radioactive work. And you may use one of those boxes, for example, that you put your hands in, rubber gloves, and you work inside. That's very rare, but it can occur. That's what's covered by other. If it's not on here, check it out and see what we've actually got to provide the safety. Physical properties. This is quite an important box, I think, because you have to make sure you know what the substance can do. A good example is a chemical that you've been issued with or you've actually bought in for your project, and it's cost a certain amount of money, you've waited for it, it's come, and you tip it in some water to dilute it out and nothing happens. It sits there on the top of the water spinning away all day. That's because it's not soluble in water. Check. If a substance isn't soluble in water, it might be soluble in something else. It might actually be soluble in hot water. There is a way of finding out. Your data sheets should tell you, but if you're not sure, there is something, it's called the Merck Index. It's a bit of a tome, but what it contains is information about virtually every well-known chemical that there is. And it's not just data sheets. safety data sheets. It will tell you about how the chemical's found, how it's made, what you can do with it, what it's used for commonly. But it also tells you a lot about physical properties. So it might tell you about it dissolves in benzene, it might dissolve in alcohol, it might dissolve in pH 9, but nothing below that. This is the information you need, because your chemical will have to be dissolved, if you need to dissolve it, in the right substance, the right solvent. So this will tell you. If between the data sheets and this book you're not actually sure after that, you can then ask someone else, a technician, who will probably put you in the right direction. But it's wise to go through this book first, because you'll then get used to what it's like and what the information that's inside is like. It's a useful thing to know. I would guarantee that most places that work with chemicals had some form of Merck Index. It might be more up to date than this one. It might have all sorts of different handbooks that will tell you physical property information that you'll need to know. But make sure you do know the physical properties of your particular substance. Chances are it'll dissolve in water, but if it doesn't, it's an awful waste of time and money. What do I do to get rid of it? Okay, I've come to the end of this particular set of experiments, or even my project itself, and I've got a cupboard full of chemicals. What do I do? Well, the first thing you don't do is tip them down the sink. There was a time a lot of chemicals went down the sink, but that's all changed. You can't do that anymore. Your CoSHH data will tell you what to do with the chemical. And again, frequently it will say local authorities will have some protocol about dealing with it. What we tend to ask you to do is to check with us. If you've got a couple of bottles of sodium chloride, potassium chloride, yes, you can put that down the sink. That's not going to cause any grief. But if you've got some sort of nasty solvent mix, then that will have to be disposed of by a reputable company. What we then tend to do is collect such chemicals in waste solvents or waste chemical bottles, whereupon when they're in bulk, they are then disposed of by us. If your CoSHH information distinctly tells you to do a certain thing, then do that, but check with us first. Do not just leave the chemicals in the cupboard and walk off. Do not leave unlabeled chemicals in bottles and walk off, because that's dangerous. Get some help and help yourself and us to deal with the chemicals you no longer need. We might actually keep some of them. Sometimes they're useful for the next project. You might have actually even inherited a chemical from a previous project student because it's stable and can be used again. Whatever, use a bit of common sense, but don't just tip things down the sink. It can cause a lot of problems, and it's illegal. Right, now we get to the nitty-gritty. On the last page there is a thing called assessed risk. All right, you filled out your CoSHH form. At the end of that, do you think there's any risk involved in using this chemical or substance? If no, that's fine. The assessed risk is none, if standard lab protocol is followed. If there's a chance you might come to some harm by something happening, say for example using concentrated acids continuously, you might suffer from splash damage, because that's just the way it is when you're using chemicals. You can't be 100% safe all the time. Something might happen. You can put very low risk of splash during dilution, that sort of thing. Some idea of what might happen, as long as you know what might happen. If at the end of it you come to the conclusion that actually I don't really want to use this substance because it's quite nasty, then you can discuss that with your supervisor and find out what you can do as an alternative. But don't fill that out and say, yeah, it's going to be a heavy risk, and then carry on using it, because that's not right. The idea is safety. If you think there is a problem in using this substance which could cause you harm, or the people around you harm for some reason, it needs to go in that box, and we need to discuss it further. We only want your signatures on something that is safe. And ultimately, when you've signed off on this and your supervisor is happy with it, you bring it to the technical staff in the project labs. They are the ones that issue with the substance. They will look at the CoSHH form. They might even question you on it. And unless your answers are satisfactory, and unless you've done this CoSHH form to our satisfaction, we won't issue with the substance. If we think you might come to harm because of what you're going to do, and you haven't detailed it on here, you'll be sent away to do the form again. So I urge you to do the forms properly the first time. Don't treat them as a joke. Don't treat them as something I must get rid of and get them out of the way. Do it properly. Do it the first time carefully, and then there won't be a problem. But always make sure ultimately that you think you will be safe from harm when using this substance or chemical. It's as simple as that. Okay, so you've got your chemical, you've done your CoSHH assessment, it's safe to use, you're ready to go on your project, and you have to make a dilution. Do you know what a 10% solution is? Do you know what a 5 times 10 to the minus 3 molar solution is? If you do, fine. But if you don't, you must find out. In this particular folder with these videos, you'll find there's an information sheet, and this information sheet is also spread over the different project modules within Wolf. The information sheet is information for solution making. And what it will do is help you run through all the different terminology you'll find when you're making solutions and using chemicals. How to work out concentrations, how to work out dilute solutions from liquids and solids, what weight per volume means. If you're not sure about doing something, don't ask a friend. They may not know either. Don't try and work it out between you. Don't guess. If you're really, really unsure, ask someone who knows what they're doing. Ask one of the technical staff, they'll help you. Ask your supervisor. But you must get it right. If you've bought a chemical and you've made a 50% solution, and you've made an error, and it's not 50%, it's only 25%, all your project work is wasted because it's based on a solution that is incorrect. So you've wasted your time. So make sure you know what you're doing. I'm not trying to say that you don't know anything. Some students are very, very good at chemical calculations, some struggle with it. But this is a learning process. This whole project work you do is not something we just say, right, get on with it. You're here to learn. If you don't know how to make solutions up, we can teach you. It's as simple as that, it's what we're for. But at the end of it, when you come away, you can be confident of saying, right, I can make a 5 times 10 to the minus solution of this because I know how to do it. I've done it before. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Don't be frightened of it. There's always help. That's what we're here for. As an example of what can happen if you don't do what CoSHH tells you to do and you panic, or you just decide to ignore CoSHH anyway and do it your own way, have a look at this. This happened in the project lab a few years ago, but I kept it as a souvenir. A student decided to dispose of a chemical they didn't want in the nearest available, what they thought was empty container. This happened to be lying on the bench. Oh, it'll do, I'll tip it in here. Unfortunately, it wasn't empty, it hadn't been rinsed out. And the two chemicals were an example of something that shouldn't be mixed together. And fortunately, a member of the technical staff on site actually noticed the plastic bulging, threw it quickly into a safety cabinet where it burst, like that. It was a mistake. It shouldn't happen, and I hope it doesn't happen to you. But please don't assume anything, and don't ignore what your CoSHH data tells you.